All right. Welcome, A Little Crazy Podcast. I'm David Magee. It's a unique one today. The Phoebe Goodwin is traveling. She's got some other work today, but I have a personal friend in the studio for this podcast. She's known as an ESPN sideline reporter. Kind of, I'm going to say a little bit famous for her sideline shimmy. But it's interesting because we go way back. We've done some professional work together. I was involved in recruiting her once to a company. And I remember at that time, we connected dots, that we had some stories of pain and also healing and trauma in our lives that had similarity. And I remember noting that one day we might have the opportunity to explore that more deeply. And I've been so amazed at the evolution that has happened since. And today's guest, she's an ESPN sideline reporter in college football, but she is a champion of the cause of addiction and recovery and the impact that has in a family. She is Lauren Sisler. In her book, Shatterproof, How I Overcame the Shame of Losing My Parents to Opioid Addiction and Found My Sideline Shimmy. Lauren, I've waited on this conversation for the longest time.
We have been waiting. And as you prefaced it, this conversation has been waiting for years.
Years in percolation.
Yes.
You were at a TV station in the Birmingham area as a well-known personality. You were making a move professionally. I get involved because I'm like, this is an amazing, talented woman. This media company I'm involved with has to hire her. And somewhere in that conversation, at that time, I had not been public with my story. I was still learning to find the words to share it. Honestly, I was still trying to figure out how to talk to myself about it, much less go public. And then we start connecting some dots, and you tell me yours, Lauren, you lost both of your parents to overdose on the same day, hours apart.
Yeah. It's amazing, as you mentioned, when you start to peel the layers back on people's stories and recognize that we are all connected in some way. And you and I specifically in this case, with both of my parents dying from prescription drug overdoses within 5 hours of each other, completely a shock to the system, had no idea, get a phone call from my dad, get on the next plane, get home. I was a gymnast at Rutgers, and then I find out he too passed away. And it was just absolutely shocking. I just talked to them hours before, and here we are now learning that not only my mom died, but my dad died. And as an 18-year-old, still young, naive, had no idea how I was going to conquer the world as a young adult without my two parents and my two best friends there to support me.
A lot of the work I do and you do in addiction and recovery, when people often begin on their stories, I always say, it's okay. I've heard it all. I'll be honest. Yours is the only one like that I've heard. There's a trail of stories, and there's a few I've heard close to that. But to be a young college freshman, to get the call in, because at that time, we didn't even have the knowledge of overdoses that we have now. And there was a lot of shame involved. There was a lot of people didn't even know how to talk about it. And here you are, not only having to face that, but you have to decide, am I going back to college? Mm-hmm. And if I do I bury this deep inside? Am I even supposed to talk about this?
And you talk about that conversational piece. So March 24th, 2003. So this is the timeline, as you mentioned. We are not talking about
Nobody's talking about it.
Nobody's talking about it. And nor were my parents, which is why we were completely blindsided by this, because there were no conversations being had. Hey, I need help. Hey, this is a problem. It was, a situation where the finances were starting to kind of be in disarray. And I think there were little hints here and there from the outside. That's always the $1 million question. Well, did you know? Were there signs? Were there things? Looking back, hindsight's 20/20. But
in arrears.
In the rear,
right.
yeah. But we're not talking about it. They're not talking about it. And therefore, I think when you ask, okay, I go back to Rutgers, I have to decide how I'm going to approach this. I very much took the same stance. Not going to talk about it. And I just ran so far from reality as fast as I possibly could to bury it, because that to me became my new reality. And I felt that if I could just kind of take my own story and take the truth and just manipulate it a little bit, people wouldn't ask questions, and I would never have to truly stand here with courage to come out and speak openly about what had happened, because that shame just had its grip on me for so many years because of the nature of my parents passing.
You're a person of faith. I'm assuming faith was a rock to get you through, or did that come later? Tell me about that.
So growing up, we were a church-going family, always at church, always at Sunday school. I never forget Oakview Christian Church in my tiny little community. The little marquee would always have, maybe 15, 16 people that would attend church, the offering, maybe $25, $30,
Wow.
And this was back in the, late 90s,
Yeah.
early 2000s, right? But tiny little country church. And I remember faith just being such a big part of my life, going into gymnastics competitions. There was not a day that went by. My parents would tuck me in at night. We would say our prayers up until the day that I left for college. And not a lot of kids can say that, because especially you get into your teenage years and you're like, mom and dad, come on.
Done with that.
Yeah, done with that. And I know, that sort of, being a little bit different in that sense, but I do remember faith, and just even when things would get a little rocky. And again, in my eyes, rocky was not nearly as bad above the surface as it was below the surface.
Right.
Like I was just seeing kind of the tip of the iceberg, whereas my parents were experiencing so much more behind closed doors. But I just remember, faith and prayer and determination, we're a family, and we have faith, and we're going to get through this, and God's going to carry us. And Footprints in the Sand was always my favorite poem, always my favorite poem. It was then that I carried you. And I will tell you, you ask, where did faith come in? Obviously, there was a foundation that was there. But I'll be honest with you, when my parents passed away, the one thing that sets in with grief, and this all too well, anger.
Oh, yeah.
Woo! Like,
It comes in hot.
Why me?
Yeah.
Why did this happen? I've done life right. I've done everything right.
Everything right. And here I am. I've worked my way I've been doing my prayers every night. I've worked my way on the Rutgers gymnastics team. Here I am. I've done it all. I'm a good person. Why are you doing this to me?
Yep. And I think that anger definitely, like you said, comes in hot. And I never stopped believing. I never stopped leaning in, or I should say, I never lost my faith. But instead of leaning in, I kind of leaned out. I'm going to do this on my own, because you know what? Right now, I feel a little bit kind of lost in the shuffle. I feel like you've kind of abandoned me a little bit there, God. So I know you're there, but I'm going to try to walk this walk a little bit on my own. And I think that is where I kind of really came into my own. I'm doing this thing at Rutgers. I'm 8 hours from home, in a total culture shock, right? Small town, little, like as I mentioned, small town girl going to the big city and trying to do
a church
this
of
thing.
15 people to there you are in the middle of,
the middle of Rutgers, the abyss of, a melting pot, essentially. And, tried to kind of do it on my own for a little while, but then realized, and this has kind of been my mantra, is, God never promises to deliver us from hardships.
Yes.
But he promises to deliver us through them. And so, he's not always going to route you around those roadblocks, right? Sometimes you got to go right through the middle. And I think that is something that, of course, was challenging, but it taught me a lot. And I would just say, through faith and, of course, the support of family and friends and the people that were there helping me to pick up the pieces. But let's be real, as you mentioned, the shame piece of it. as I sit here today, almost 22 years after my parents passed away, like this was not an easy journey. And to have the courage to be able to sit here truthfully, openly, honestly, and vulnerable. And that day that you and I had our first conversation, to even have the guts to share any piece of it.
Even then, Lauren, and I remember it well because neither of us had really gone public with our story. I had not gone public of losing my son William to an accidental overdose. I had not gone public of almost losing another son to an accidental overdose. He was still early in recovery. I had not gone public with my story of addiction and fall, and my daughter's story of eating recovery. You had not fully really gone public with yours. The Guidepost article had not run. You'd done a little bit of speaking. You were just beginning to. And I remember you were like, hey, I feel a lot of what you feel, and I think we could help people one day. And I said, I think we can. We'll stay in touch. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about faith, I think that a lot of people want it to happen overnight, but knowing when it's the right time. And it takes a resilience because you have to be determined to want to help others, but also be patient enough to do it when it's time. And it can't always be your time. And I think that watching your journey, I really saw a lot of that, and I've gained a lot of inspiration from that. And now that you're going full steam, and so am I. And I think it was just meant to be that we collide.
I mean, you realize that was like almost a decade ago.
Lauren, it was almost a decade ago. It gives me chill bumps because we both knew we were destined for it.
Yeah.
We both knew we were called. And I can remember where we were standing and and what's funny is, for anybody listening, there's a moment, and we both knew it. There were some people around us in an environment, and we were almost whispering it. We were almost whispering it because it wasn't fully known, but we knew. And a decade passes, and you were one of those people that, I put a check mark around. And so you've been on the advisory board of the William Magee Center, now named after my late son, and that work is really only beginning. And things you don't know, like I was up with Creighton at the Partnership to End Addiction, Creighton Drury, the CEO of the Partnership to End Addiction, who you're doing some speaking with. And I was able to, they already knew about you, but I was able to, they were like, well, who else do you have your eye on? And I said, I've really got my eye on too. That I've done a lot of things with Zach Clark, and I can tell you a powerhouse is Lauren Sisler, and it's been so fun to share that.
I love that so much. And I thinking back to like the instant gratification piece of this, right? We are in a society now, and like wilder than ever. I think back to just when I was in college, right, when all this stuff was percolating and happening, like we were just getting like Facebook. We were just getting like the social media stuff. And now we're literally in a world where like, if it takes more than like 2 seconds to send something and the internet's slowing down, like we're over here like, come on. Like what is happening here? Or I just think about being in the stadium, trying to pull up a stat in the middle of a game. And I'm frustrated if I can't get it to come up in 5 seconds.
If it's a big crowd and it's jammed, the Wi-Fi in the
like,
stadium's jammed.
Come on, y'all got to get this figured out, right? So the instant gratification piece of it. But I truly believe that sometimes we just have to be in it. We just have to be in it. We have to be immersed in it. We just have to sit in our stories, sit in the grief and the shame and the pain and the anger and all those things that come along with it before we can truly find the gratitude on the other side and find the purpose on the other side.
But to be able to help others, I think most effectively, that's critical. And I have a lot of people that will come to me in recovery and they'll say, okay, I'm sober now. I'm ready to help people. Yeah. And what I always say to them is, hey, I'm not here to tell you your time. Yeah. You say you're ready. I believe you.
Let's go. Yeah.
Let's go. But what I tell them is they say, you see me, but it took me 6 years after William died. It took me, almost 7 years after I'd gotten back on my feet and saved myself and my marriage and so forth. And my son Hudson, it took him after he came back to life and found sobriety after an accidental overdose. It took him years. I mean, we didn't just spring out there, as you note. Did your parents, Did they? I mean, I'm guessing because wasn't as much dialogue. They probably felt and saw things happen around them, but they may not have fully even understood. I remember when my life was falling apart, things start going bad. Like, wait, where did the money in the bank account go?
Mm-hmm.
And things are but I remember somebody telling me once, I'm sorry you're having a hard time. And I said back, I'm not having a hard time.
That's good. That's very telling. I mean, and I will tell you this. We talk about like the hindsight, the things that you look back on, and I've had the opportunity to kind of dig a little deeper and, obviously understanding more of the opioid crisis and how, a lot of things were, glamorized back then or, kind of swept under the rug. And it's really not that addictive. And this is going to help you. And this is only going to make you feel better. And well, heck yeah, it makes you feel better.
Yeah. So much so they're going for another.
And what's the end game? And I will tell you, looking back, so my mom was going to a pain management doctor for degenerative disc disease. So she had multiple surgeries over the course of a few years. My father had the chronic back pain. He had PTSD, service in the military, was dealing with that as well, which comes with a level of depression. And they were going to this pain management doctor in Roanoke, Virginia, where I'm from. And I'm looking back at some of the medical records. And specifically, my mom was applying for disability, and she kept being denied the disability because the judge just didn't think she was in need of it, right? Well, finally, she had to get an attorney involved to try to help her because the last thing my mom wanted to do was stop working because, truth be told, she was only working part-time as it was because she wanted to make sure that my brother and I were taken care of, got us to our practices every day. Like, she was still very involved while my dad was working at the VA Medical Center. And she gets this attorney involved, and they basically tell her, we need you to journal every single day, what you're taking, how you're feeling, and that's how we're going to be able to hopefully win this case and help you get some disability that you need. And so looking at these records now, again, years and years later, I see someone, first of all, my mom was so by the book. Like her and my dad were kind of opposite in that. My dad, if he had the money, he was spending it. Light it on fire, baby. But then my mom, on the other hand, was like, reel it in, And so they balanced each other well. But I will say, when you read her journaling and when you see these documents that she's piecing together before she's supposed to go in front of this judge again, you see someone that is so innocent, that is doing what she's told. This is going to make me feel better. The doctor says, take this. I'm taking this. This is how I feel. Now I'm taking this. This is how I feel. And I think as I read this, it almost just was like soul crushing because, not that I really thought any differently, but you just see someone.
But you see it in black and white and you realize she was a victim.
And that she's it's like I'm watching her walk into this
just
dark tunnel.
Spiral. Her name was Leslie,
yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. He was George.
Mm-hmm. Went by Butch. He hated the name George.
He did? He went by Butch?
Yeah, he hated the name. And, I didn't know until
Sisler?
Butch Sisler. And I had no idea. I was like, where did Butch come from? I didn't know Butch is like a junior name. So he was a junior. And so that's where Butch came from. I had no idea, but that is actually a known junior name. And so he went by Butch and my mom, Leslie. So, yeah.
Tell me a favorite characteristic or memory or something about them.
Yeah, as a gymnast, we traveled a lot. And so I have such fond memories of them just being so tied to my athletics. And of course, my brother would travel until he was an age where they felt they could leave him at home or with my grandma because, as my older brother, eventually he's like, all right, I'm done traveling. But, we would pile in the car and, crank up the cassette tape, and Traveling Wilburys was always like the super band, the Tom Petty super band that we loved listening to. And I just have fond memories of those trips because we were all together and there's just just this feeling of like laughter and love, and then going to these competitions. And I still have all these VHS tapes where I can hear the commentary. And you've got my mom over here who she's a nervous wreck, of course, but she knows everything there is to know about the sport of gymnastics. My dad, meanwhile, can't even figure out what event I'm on. He calls the beam the bars and messes it up, and you can literally hear him in the background. But you can also hear the love and the pride that they have. And I think that's one thing that I think about is that I could feel that love when they were here, and I can still feel that love in their absence.
Just a couple of months ago, you lost a brother, the brother you just mentioned. I'm so sorry. sometimes it just doesn't seem fair. And I'm just so sorry. That was around Thanksgiving or November, am I right?
Yep, November 8th.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so you wake up and think, my family, I mean, you're young. You have a precious child now. I've seen in your great Instagram, and you have a family of your own, but you're young. And you're like, where my family? They're leaving me. So how do you make sense of that? And I'm assuming you learned some lessons from having buried parents to how to deal and cope, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I think that after, my brother's passing, I found myself continuously trying to reach back into the past and trying to grasp at everything I could to try to make sense of it and to maybe lessen the blow. And it's just different. It is just so different. And you mentioned I'm young. I'm 40 years old, so
you're still young.
Subjective to some, but
believe me, you're young.
But my brother just 42. And you say that, right? Because yes, I do have a precious family. My husband John, my little man Mason, who's almost 19 months old, and like what an amazing family. And I'm so blessed and grateful to have them. And they really have just been amazing. And just seeing that kind of evolution of my life and now being able to be a mom myself. But I keep envisioning that Olin Mills photo of me and my mom and my dad and my brother. And it's like all of a sudden I'm seeing all three of them just kind of evaporate, and so like I'm the last one standing, and you mentioned like the why, like how my mom was 45, my dad was 52, my brother 42, and you just think like how does this happen? How did we get here? And it is challenging, and just to feel that grief. But one thing that I've really kind of brought to the surface through all of this is there was a time, I think when I was 18, I was running, right? I was running from that grief, running as fast as I could, like just get me out of this and doing everything I could. And I wouldn't say I was reckless, because I'll say this, I'm very fortunate that when I went back to Rutgers just 2 weeks after burying my parents, I'm sure I, found other ways to cope, but I was so fortunate that substance was never a thing for me.
That wasn't your thing.
Never became a thing, never was in high school, even before I knew my parents had an addiction. And it was just one of those things where I think maybe the athlete in me, I just never participated in it. But, college, even the athletes are, we're all, everybody's going out and exploring, and, that's how it is. But I'm very fortunate that I never kind of went down that road necessarily for coping. But, I will say back then I was finding other ways to run away from the reality of what was happening. And I was burying, as you mentioned, that word burying. I was burying this pain that I was feeling for so long. And now as I'm sitting in this grief, I'm recognizing, and the great doctor John C. Maxwell gave me this incredible vision and illustration that I've been really just seeing. He said, you know what, Lauren? He said, sometimes we try to jump off the operating table far too soon.
Right.
Lay down. Let God do his work.
Yes.
Don't try to outrun this thing. Don't try to escape it, because you can't. You just can't do it. And the more you try, the harder the resistance just is gonna hit you. And whether it comes now or down the road, it's gonna catch up to you. And so I really feel like I've just kind of been on that operating table, kind of just buoying here in the water, knowing that like I'm in it. It's hard. It sucks so bad. But I also know that lessons are being learned, and
right.
Clarity will one day come. I can't have it right now. I won't have it right now, but eventually it will come. And
Eventually it will come.
And I think that is probably the one thing that I did learn from my parents passing and that tragedy, is that there is light on the other side. And you don't have a timeline. There's no perfect blueprint.
Yes.
There's no manual. But just know, in good time,
yes,
it will come.
The joy always returns in how you see them and how you see and understand their story. But I love that advice of not trying to force it. It's just like telling your story. I had a woman, one of the hardest phone calls I've ever had to make. Well, two of them. One, when I had to call my wife and tell her I'd just found William. The other was calling a mother of a college student who died by suicide, and I had to be the one to call her. And I remember within weeks, she's on fire to make a difference in the world, which she is now doing, and I knew she would. But within weeks, she's ready to go. And I said, I'm probably a closer friend here than I'm going to sound like when I say this, but I'm not going to help you for a minute. And I don't know that I'm right, but I'm not going to help you for a minute. I think just sit in it, be in it, and you'll know. You'll know. But that emotion that wants to make you fire out of the gate immediately, you just don't have all the answers. You don't have all the perspective.
And the bandwidth is just not there.
The bandwidth is not there. It takes your soul. It takes you lose a part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a part of you with it in so many respects. But in time, you can get those parts back as well as parts of them you lost. Mm-hmm. But it takes just being able to sort through it,
Yeah, and I think that's so powerful. And just what great advice, because it does take courage to kind of say to someone, hey, I know you want to help, but like slow down a little.
I was like, you think I'm your friend in this, and I especially am.
Yes.
I especially am, so I'm going to say, I'm not calling you right now. I wouldn't call her back for a little while. And eventually I did. I said, okay, let's do it. But for a while I said, I'm not going to take your call if you want to talk about what we're going to go do. Mm-hmm. Not mm-hmm. yet. Mm-hmm. Not yet. And it's hard. Yeah.
What a good friend. What a good friend, and someone that's walked through it yourself and been able to kind of comprehend that significant loss of a child, to be able to empathize, but also just to have like you said, the perspective, because I do think that we want to know it all right now.
We want to know it. That's our nature. And I'm impatient. Believe me.
Me too.
Hello.
The worst.
Yeah, those of us with media backgrounds, we've
but
never
then
been...
my poor husband has to be so patient with me. I'm like, hold on a sec. Gotta go do this. Gotta go do this, right. So yeah. I want all the patience in the world for myself, but I ain't got it to give to others.
The other thing we talked about years ago, so it's fun when you watch somebody's star rise, and I get to tell people, oh, there's my friend on the sideline at that college football game on ESPN. What I also would like to tell them is that I knew it was coming. Because, I did. When we were first talking, you said, I was a gymnast. They've got this new SEC network. Maybe I'll get on there and, I don't know, maybe I'll get the opportunity to do some of that. I really love being around it. And I remember thinking, I bet you'll do just fine in that, because I had seen you doing sports on the news, and I knew what was there. And so let me go on record as the least surprised person to watch your work on ESPN and college football. It's been so fun.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, and having the believers out there and the people that support you in that, because I do think that, it's sometimes hard to see it in yourself, right? To look in the mirror and say, why am I deserving? Especially when in life you feel like life knocks you down and you're thinking, okay, well, then maybe like, why me? And I will tell you, David, there were times, and especially as I was running from the reality of what took my parents' lives in the overdose, the stigma associated with that, there were times that I was fearful that an employer like ESPN would do a little old Google search. Oh, Lauren, drug addiction, parents, because then you suddenly get lumped into this category, and the character flaws that come with being an addict, right? And all the things that people want to slap a label on you.
And they immediately just want to think, well, it'll duplicate here. Mm-hmm. And to be frank, and I understand it, and I overcame it, but almost immediately after William died, I did experience that in applying for a job, and they did their Google search. And in their mind, I was not ready. Mm. And maybe there were other more complicated issues they assumed. I had to go back to the board and fight through that. And I did end up getting that job 90 days later, but was initially passed because of what you're saying. So I understand the stigma. I understand the fear of that. Now, what we're beginning to know, it's why you're here on this podcast. It's why you go speak around the country. It's why I do the same, because what we're doing is working to break the stigma so that people understand, A, we're all humans and we all have our complications. And also, what happened yesterday to your parents or even in my family, not only does it not define the job I will be able to do in a negative way, it might define it in a very positive way. I, for instance, love hiring people in recovery.
Yes.
Oh, they have done so much soul searching and so much work. By the time it sticks, they are so trustworthy. So every human needs that work. By the time somebody,
I was about to say far greater than the average someone not in recovery. I mean, there's certain things that, of course, I would personally never want to have to walk through that everyday battle. But on the flip side of that, like you said, the soul searching and just the deep. I've been to some AA meetings before, and of course Al-Anon as well. But specifically sitting in those rooms and listening to these men and women just pour themselves out, but the work that they're going through, and just to see the layers that they're willing to peel back that nobody else has the courage to do.
Nobody. We're trained and taught to hide it all, and so they've had to go bare their soul. And you would be in that same category of what you've been through in losing parents and the work you've done to come to grips with it yourself. But what you said is right. And frankly, I see this fear in students and young people all the time. I see it in their parents. Often, I have a saying, Lauren, it's that people say, oh man, I bet it's really hard to get a young person to help. And I go, yeah, it's hard. It's like a knife fight in the street. Yeah. It's so hard. And once you win that fight, then you got to go battle their parents.
Yeah.
Because their parents have their own pictures. How's it going to look to grandmother? Will this hurt their future job? Parents say that to me 90% of the time.
Wow.
Well, I know they're struggling, but I'm also, they're doing pretty well in school. I don't want to interrupt their job. So we're here, you're in Oxford, Mississippi, where I live, where the University of Mississippi is, and you're in town to speak. You're addressing our students. I'm so proud of the speaking that you're able. I don't know how you do it as a parent of a young child, and then ESPN college football duties, a wife, a community work. I literally don't know. But you do somehow, and here you are. And so the Ole Miss Athletics Department and the William Magee Center, named after my son, that gives me chill bumps.
Yay!
It gives me such chill bumps when I think oh
full
my gosh,
circle
full
moment.
circle. It's unbelievable. So you're here to address them, but that message that you're bringing is so important because they do face stigma, and they face it in their families. And we're making progress. I'm seeing it. This work is paying off, but the messaging is so critical.
It is so important. And to meet them where they're at. And I think that's where it's so critical, as you mentioned, because, obviously these kids that are coming up through middle school into high school, they're shaped by their experiences. And that's truly what I've learned, and especially in the broadcasting world, right? Because my job is, I'm a professional storyteller, right? I go out and ask questions, I tell stories, and I've seen the ripple effect and the impact. And I ultimately have seen how people's life experiences and stories shape their overall story, right? And I think that, as you walk into an arena and you talk to these young adults, it's really having to kind of pull the curtains back and say, look, I'm here. And really, in many ways, I use the word disarm. Like, you've got to disarm them and say, hey, me and you, we're about to have a conversation. I know we've got 500 people in here, but being able to
right there
pull them right in and say, hey, we're all in this together. And, my mantra has become fall in love with your story, because I think that's something that so many people struggle with. And me, myself, and even after the passing of my brother, was ready to light it all on fire. Literally say all the work that I've been doing, the book that I wrote, all these things, put a match, light it on fire, because I was angry, I was upset. And I'm like, how can I truly be in love with my story when I'm faced with this thing, right? But finally starting to see things come back around, and, slowly but surely, but having those conversations and being able to meet them where they're at, and to allow them to see that, hey, I understand. Help me to understand where you're at right now. Help me to truly understand what it is you're going through, and ultimately giving them the courage to have a voice. Because I think in so many ways they're silenced by the shame and the fear and the judgment and I got to be perfect for,
They tell me they're afraid it's going to be a label.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but that's so
it.
important. They tell me it's like, I don't want a scarlet letter. They all read the book.
Mm-hmm.
They say, if I own my fraternity house, or I own my team, or I own the band, if I say I've got a problem, I've got a label. And then what happens? They say, does that mean I could never drink forever? What if I slip? Then I will be double judged. They're so afraid of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've shared, I think what's helped me, I love that what you talk about. We have a lot in common in our approach, because the finding your story and being willing, understanding that, trying to help them understand they got to find their story. They also can revise it. It's not just cast in stone.
Mm-hmm.
My William died of an accidental drug overdose, and that was the most horrific story. And that's how history remembered him on that day.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a lot of work by and around and for our William, and his story has revised.
Yes.
My story of when my life crashed and I wrecked my family, at that day 14 years ago, was dark and hard, and there was a lot of gossip and a lot of, judgment. Well-deserved, I'm sure. 14 years later, I've revised my story. And I always try to let students know, you haven't messed up. You've lived. And you want to love your story and live your story, but you also have to remember parts of it that you want to improve upon. You can.
Mm-hmm.
You can revise your story.
It's just one chapter.
It's
right?
one chapter. The book continues,
Mm-hmm.
And as we find with my William, it continues after they're gone. Look at your parents. Leslie and George. What's funny is I always say, I know it's Sisler. I say Sizzler, like you got Z's
Sizzler.
in there.
Well, hey, that was my DJ name, DJ Sizzler.
Yeah, I know. It's like there's something about Lauren
Yeah.
Sisler on the sports. It feels like Sizzler, you know.
I love that.
You're doing this sideline shimmy on games. It feels like you got Z's in there instead of an S. But look at your parents, Leslie and George. That for you and their demise, hours apart. Oh, so traumatic, such a dark family chapter. Look at how they were people of faith. Look at how they are using today. You're able to use them. Now that's beautiful.
It is
That's
so
a
beautiful.
story revised. It's so beautiful.
Yes, and I love that, the story revised. And, my Auntie Linda, my mom's sister, her and my Uncle Mike really took me under their wing because I was 18, still young and really just completely oblivious to how to live life. And, what she really helped me to do over the course of several years is I fought her fisticuffs over and over and over as she would try to lovingly share the truth. I would just want to backhand her and be like, you're trying to destroy their legacy. You're attacking them, and just would be so angry. But what she helped me to realize over the course of time was my parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives.
Yes.
Right? And you talk about like the revised version of this because we are always writing our stories. And if that was the ending, right? And I can tell you that I loved my parents so deeply when they were here. I never in my wildest thought that I could love them more than I did then. And my love for them continues to grow, continues to expand in their absence.
Wow.
And to me, I'm just like, the story is still being written.
The story is still being written. She is Lauren Sisler. Her book is Shatterproof: How I Overcame the Shame of Losing My Parents to Opioid Addiction and Found My Sideline Shimmy. You can find videos of her ESPN sideline shimmy on her Instagram account all over the internet. You can find her book at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all the places you find books. Sign up for our newsletter, alittlecrazy.com. Just punch in your email address. You'll get it. We'll tell you more about Lauren and her work on the newsletter and where you can find out more. And what's your website? LaurenSisler.com?
LaurenSisler.com.
Sisler. Did I put the Z's in again? Lauren Sisler.
Hey, maybe I need to get that domain too, just in case.
You definitely need to get that just for me,
Just for
who
you.
will be typing in, trying to put, I know how to spell it though. Lauren Sisler. SISLER.com. That's it. Hey, thanks for this. And you know what? We're going to do, there's more in our future.
I love it. I'm so excited. Now we get
too.
to break, get to have some lunch and fellowship and hang out for a
And
little bit.
watch you speak tonight.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, David.